The morning rain had just stopped when the parade of clowns appeared. They seemed to have come out of nowhere, this flash mob of buffoons. One minute the street signs were shaking off teardrops of rainwater onto slick asphalt, and the next, a congregation of long black shoes were shattering the rippling puddles as the clowns plodded forward in a slow shuffle, all facing the same way. They were draped in all fashions of baggy clothing, mostly in shades of silver, and their arms ending in beige, oversized gloves. Their faces were all painted, milk white, with exaggerated smiling lips the color of fresh blood adorning their mouths. Their eyes were misshapen and black, as if the eyeballs had been replaced by jagged chunks of coal, dark and abyssal under the hidden sun. The only real variation amongst this swarm, other than their mismatched heights, were their hair, boasting an impressive and colorful variety of flame-like tufts and cloud-like poofs, thick comical curls and thin weedy patches, in all the bright and gaudy colors of an unnatural rainbow. Their march was uninterrupted, for no bystander dared to wander out and intercept this grotesque legion. Those who witnessed this absurdity stayed hidden, behind closed doors and narrow alleyways, while eschatological whispers escaped from their quivering lips. No one had the courage to venture closer and gawk upon them. After all, there was nothing to be read from their frozen expressions, nothing from the milk-white faces with coal-black eyes and blood-red mouths. The clowns trotted forward in total silence, save for some occasional squeaking and clicking that emanated from the silvery bodies, like the chirrups of dolphins, created by some unknown method, as their painted smiles remained fixed and unmoving. As this absurd platoon continued to march forward, more clowns appeared to join their sullen ranks. One skittered out from under the sewer, while another crawled down the side of a deserted building like a large pale spider. Three even emerged out from under a car that was parked along the street. No one could say where these clowns had come from, nor could anyone say why they made their unexpected appearance, like a hidden disease announcing its presence with a sudden rash of symptoms. Had they been driven out from their clandestine hiding places because they needed to migrate elsewhere? Or had they simply experienced an unspoken impetus that there was no longer any need to hide? Regardless, the Harlequin Legion shambled forward, ever forward, until they blurred into a shadowy crowd near the eldritch horizon before disappearing over the hill towards the sea. A sign, Convency Shortcut Greater Than, looked promising. Smooth pavement, no traffic, a rare stroke of luck. But then came the checkpoints. I coasted downhill into fenced-off lanes. To my left, crumbling stone, dust-fogged glass. Inside, an old clerk hunched over a yellowed ledger, flipping brittle pages. To my right, clean, modern. A sleek checkpoint, its attendant tapping at a glitching screen, never looking up. Between them, a metal corral, stretching uphill like a trap, no shortcuts. I slowed, heat pressing down, pavement radiating through my tires, sweat pooled under my shirt. I rolled to the modern booth first. The sleek clerk barely glanced at my papers. No exit stamp? There was never an entry booth? I gestured yesterwards. The clerk sighed. Then you cannot be auto-processed. Go to their exit first. Legs screamed uphill, turned, gravity mocked me downhill, sweat dripping. The old clerk sniffed at my stench and flipped through my papers. No entry stamp. There wasn't a booth. He waved vaguely toward the other checkpoint. No entry means no exit needed. Just tell them to let you in. Uphill again, shirt glued to me, turned, downhill. Just wind spreading my stink further. They sent me to just enter here. The sleek clerk gagged. They need to issue an exemption stamp, a 38. Back to exit, I groaned. He flicked his wrist, and salt grains from my face. Crust landed on his paperwork. Everything chafed. Even downhill felt uphill. My clothes had fused into a single soggy biohazard. The old clerk's face twisted. Want an exemption stamp, a 38. Something in my sweat turned chemical. The air itself bent. Overwhelmed, he snapped his ledger shut. A door slammed open. A high-ranking official stormed out, nostrils flaring. "Processing exemption," his voice cracked as he shouted across the corral. "Just let him pass, please." The sleek clerk recoiled from my radiation. "Let him through!" The guard at the corral gate hacked violently, waving me through. No paperwork needed. Hooray! The next booth stood empty. The screen hummed. No barriers, no staff. Something rustled. A small, round figure tumbled from the bushes. It bounced, wobbling on tiny feet, its spring-loaded body shuddering. Two black, dead eyes stared up, unblinking. It launched at my bags, clamping onto a strap. I swatted, but lost balance. I steadied the handlebars. Not worth crashing. The final booth was staffed. The clerk scanned my records, frowning. "Huh? Problem?" I leaned on my bars. The clerk scanned my records, frowning. "You're not in the system, like, at all." Behind me, the creature twitched, chittered, then vibrated violently. The clerk recoiled. "Oh no! You brought that?" Lights flickered. The database glitched. His eyes darted between scrolling errors and the thing gripping my bike. "You're contaminating the records." He slammed his stamp down, hard. "Just go." The road stretched empty. "Guess we're good." I nodded. It just chittered. Up ahead, another sign stood, tilted at an odd angle by the roadside. "Adventures ahead." I grinned. "Now this one's gotta be legit." Jim stared hard at his dog. Sweat, joining with tears, trickled down his cheeks. Rowdy, Jim's normally excitable and amp fun-loving Akita, stared back. Like two gargoyles guarding the gates of an ancient temple. Jim and Amp, Rowdy locked evil eyes at one another from across the simmering driveway. Rowdy would never hurt a fly. Jim moved cautiously toward Rowdy, blade in hand. Rowdy bristled and gave an almost yelp like a puppy whose tail had just been stepped on by a lumbering brute of an owner. Beneath Rowdy's paws, the asphalt burned from the midday sun. Beads of dirty sweat pooled along the brim of Jim's filthy ball cap, only to drip down onto his nose, and then onto the sizzling pavement. Jim rocked a little, his balance thrown off by the weight of the angelic battle between his shoulders. He wasn't so far gone as to not know right from wrong. Who was he listening to? The angel or the devil? "God, please," he prayed. "Let it be the right one." As he took a somber step forward, Jim bowed his head. He believed in God, but wasn't sure who God was. He hadn't really given God a chance, he confessed. Had God ever given him a chance? "Silly question," he muttered silently, to no one. Of course, God had given Jim a chance. Rowdy was one of those chances. The Kaida knelt down, fear dancing viciously in his rust-soaked puppy dog eyes. Rowdy had always trusted his master, but Jim's behavior was scaring the Akita. "It's time to go home, Rowdy. I have to..." Jim choked on the grossness of the words, even as he forced them out to who had become his best friend. "They'll be coming soon? The sun always brings out the worst ones. You've seen them. Can't let them get into you like what happened to those poor boys down at the shelter." With a heartbroken whimper of a breath, Jim dropped to his knees. For a moment, the knife almost dropped from his sweaty grip. How he wished, so badly in this moment, for a gun. But there was no time. The sirens rang out from the mountainside, warning what was left of the town. Jim shut his eyes and his mind, and took the final step to the Akita. He cursed his luck, having only a hunting knife for a weapon. He could see the first one scurrying down the hill, toward his subdivision. Nasty, hateful, filthy things. They were close now, closing in on his cul-de-sac. Rowdy gave a low moan suddenly, looking up at his owner. Almost like he understood, like he knew. Sobbing and surrounded now by the buzzing and warbled chittering, Jim withdrew the blade and collapsed onto the Akita's body. "You cannot have this one," he grunted in defiance at the terror all around him. On July 8th, 1996, Sydney Mary Crane, 42 was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for theft, aggravated assault, and triple homicide. Following several transfers over the next year, she was moved to an undisclosed maximum security prison after fatally wounding 3 separate inmates. 4 months into her incarceration, she became swear of one Regina Walters, also 42, who was moved into the adjacent cell for a series of murders in Monroe County 2 years prior. Sydney was determined to have a severe psychopathic disorder after scoring the maximum possible 40 on the PCLR, and thus, not able to experience any fear, was more curious about her new neighbor than her own safety. It should be mentioned that on the same test, Regina scored 8, the lowest on prison record for a serial killer. Given the nature of their sentences and further crimes committed, the 2 inmates were confined to quarters for the first 6 months, or until deemed fit for assimilation. The 2 were properly introduced when, on August 4th, 1997, Sydney woke to Regina standing over her bed at precisely 300. The following in its briefest possible retelling is the rest of her story. Tilde. Quickly alert, Sydney said. Well, you're a resourceful one. Andy, you're quite the devilish one, I hear. Suppose I am, she replied, sitting up. Which begs the question, what brings you to the room of a devil at this hour? We aren't so different, you and me, I know. Exactly the pleasure it gave you. The same kind you felt? The same? Sydney yawned, sardonically said, Ha! So we're friends now, are we? What are you even doing here? I have something to show you. Regina then pointed to the floor, where Sydney finally noticed the heavily mutilated corpses of 2 prison guards. Do you like my gift? Sydney took a moment to process. The faces of the 2 men had been ripped from their skulls, and it was the bloody white sheen of bone. No flesh left at all. Very much so, actually. Regina stepped forward and sat down on the bed. She looked Sydney directly in the eyes as she reached her arm beneath the bed cover, placing her hand under her. Underscore. 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 A minute later, that alerted night shift down the hall, when guards arrived at the cell, Sydney could be seen underscore 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 as her other hand caressed the eviscerated remains of a guard they were then unable to identify. Tilde. Sydney's explanation regarding Regina, although earnest, was noted by psychiatrists as symptomatic of extreme psychosis, and despite efforts to show her there were no neighboring cells in solitary confinement, she wrote me quite a detailed letter containing her version of events, likely in the knowledge that I'd become a news journalist after our time together in college. Which, to my immediate terror, I assumed she did, as I was the only Regina Walters. That she knew. First and foremost, I know there's a lot of spin on these shows because it's TV, and ultimately, they want to make money, right? So, of course, at least some of it is faked. The real problem for me, as a believer, is that I know what it's like to live in a place that's actually haunted. In my experience, paranormal activity is pretty rare, even in places you know to be haunted. When I talk about all the things that have happened to me, I'm talking about stuff that happened over several years, or to my family over a decade or more. True, sometimes we would have flurries of activity where it would be quite intense, but then it would die down a bit for a few months and return to being maybe once every few weeks that something would happen. Just like the people living in these haunted locations, they're usually talking about a series of things that happened over a long period of time. Yet, time and again, the paranormal investigator show will come in and experience more or less all the phenomena in the span of one night. Convenient, right? It's frustrating, because as a believer you know there is real paranormal activity out there, but these shows make them so gimmicky that it becomes impossible to believe anything they do. Does anyone have any experience of a paranormal investigation where they did actually experience all the reported phenomena in one night, like on these shows? Is it rare or a frequent occurrence? I see her every evening at the park. She walks the same path, earbuds in, lost in her world. She doesn't notice me, not really. But I notice her. She's different. The way she smiles at strangers, the way she stops to pet dogs, the way she hums softly to herself. It's perfect. I want to talk to her. I should talk to her, but I can't. Then one evening, fate steps in. She drops her keys. I rush forward, pick them up, and hand them to her. She smiles. "Oh, thank you. You're a good guy." I shake my head, chuckling nervously. "It's nothing." But as she turns to leave, she hesitates. "It's late. Would you mind walking with me for a bit?" "Of course, I don't mind." The streets are quiet as we walk side by side. She talks, and I listen. She laughs, and I smile. She tells me she's always been a little careless, a little too trusting. I tell her the world is dangerous, a little too trusting. I tell her the world is dangerous. She nods, glancing around. "Yeah, especially with that killer out there, the one who..." She shudders. "It's terrifying." I agree. It is terrifying. We reach her building, and she turns to me, grateful. "Really? Thank you, you're a good guy." I watch her go inside, wait until her light flickers on. Only then do I turn away, making my way home. I step into my house, lock the door, and exhale. The room is dim, a soft hum in the silence. She was beautiful, but she made a terrible mistake. I look toward the chair in the corner. A girl is tied there, trembling, eyes red from crying. I smile, crouching in front of her. "Some people can make mistakes, right?" I whisper. "After all, you made the same mistake."